Welcome to Cafe Stories, where every story is a new mystery waiting to be solved. Grab a coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Phantom Passenger. Chapter 1. A most peculiar telegram. In recording the numerous cases which have illustrated my friend Sherlock Holmes's remarkable gifts, I have found none more singular than that which occupied our attention during the bitter winter of 1887. The affair began, as so many of our adventures did, in our quarters in Baker Street, where I was still sharing rooms with my friend in those days before my marriage. The morning in question was one of those raw, penetrating days for which our English winters are so justly infamous. A thick, yellowish fog had descended upon London, rendering the view from Holmes's windows little more than a study in ochre shadows. I had stopped by, as was my custom when my practice permitted, to find my friend in an uncommonly agitated state. He was standing by the window, his tall, lean figure silhouetted against the murky light, his pipe sending elaborate curlicues of smoke into the already oppressive atmosphere. Upon the table beside his chemistry apparatus lay a telegram, its yellow paper bearing the clear marks of having been crushed and then carefully smoothed out again. "Ah, Watson!" he exclaimed, though he had not turned to see who had entered. "Your timing is, as ever, impeccable. I was just about to send a boy round to fetch you. What do you make of this?" He thrust the telegram into my hands, and I read, "My dear Mr. Holmes, I write with a matter of utmost urgency regarding a most singular occurrence on the Norwood Express this morning. A gentleman of considerable standing, one Mr. Edmund Thornfield, has vanished in a manner that defies all rational explanation. The circumstances are most extraordinary. He was last seen in a first-class compartment, both doors of which remained securely locked, the windows being quite intact and offering no possibility of egress. His hat, coat, and papers remain undisturbed within the compartment, yet the gentleman himself has utterly disappeared. Your most urgent assistance is required. Yours faithfully, Inspector G. Lestrade, Scotland Yard." "Good heavens, Holmes!" I exclaimed, settling into my old armchair by the fire. "A passenger simply vanishing into thin air? It seems quite impossible." "Does it not?" A curious smile played about his thin lips as he tapped the ash from his pipe. "And yet Lestrade is not given to flights of fancy. Whatever else one might say about our friend from Scotland Yard, he is prosaic to a fault." "Then you believe there is something in it?" "My dear Watson, it is precisely because it appears impossible that I find it so intriguing." He began to pace the room with that nervous energy I knew so well. "Consider. A first-class compartment on the Norwood Express, locked doors on both sides, windows that open barely wide enough to admit a hand, a passenger who boards at Norwood Junction and vanishes before Victoria Station, leaving behind his personal effects. What does that suggest to you?" I pondered for a moment. "Either some form of extraordinary escape in a moving train, observed by no one, or," I continued, "the witnesses are somehow mistaken. Perhaps this man simply left the compartment when no one was looking." "Most illuminating." He reached for his coat. "We have not a moment to lose, Watson. The train is being held at Victoria Station, and every minute we delay allows some vital piece of evidence to slip away. Bring your service revolver." "You expect danger, then?" I inquired. "I expect nothing, my dear fellow. I merely observe that when a man vanishes from a locked room, leaving behind his possessions but taking with him a deadly secret, danger is rarely far behind." As we descended the 17 steps to Baker Street, I could not shake a profound sense of unease. The fog seemed to wrap around us like a shroud, and the usually busy street was eerily silent save for the muffled clip-clop of a passing hansom. "I say, Holmes," I ventured as we waited for our own cab, "how did you know about the deadly secret?" He smiled, that thin, enigmatic smile that so often preceded his most brilliant deductions. "I didn't. But you have just confirmed my suspicion that there must be one. No man arranges so elaborate a disappearance without excellent cause, and I dare say we shall find Mr. Thornfield's reasons most enlightening indeed, assuming, of course, we find Mr. Thornfield himself." With that cryptic pronouncement he fell silent, and we rode toward Victoria Station through the thickening fog, each lost in our own thoughts. Little did I know then that we were embarking upon a case that would test not only Holmes's remarkable deductive powers, but also our very understanding of what was possible within the bounds of reason and law. Chapter 2. The Empty Compartment. Victoria Station presented a scene of barely contained chaos when our hansom deposited us at its imposing entrance. A considerable crowd of onlookers had gathered, merchants, clerks, and labourers alike, their social distinctions momentarily forgotten in their shared curiosity, held at bay by a cordon of constables who maintained order with that peculiar mixture of firmness and deference characteristic of London's finest. "Stand back there, if you please, sir," one particularly zealous officer was saying to a well-dressed gentleman. "Inspector's orders. Begging your pardon, sir." Inspector Lestrade met us at the platform, his ferret-like features drawn with concern. "Mr. Holmes," he said, touching his hat-brim. "Dr. Watson. I cannot tell you how gratified I am by your swift response. The newspapers will be upon us within the hour, and I confess this business has me quite confounded." "Pray give us the particulars, Inspector," Holmes replied, his sharp, observant eyes already scanning the length of the Norwood Express, which stood silent and imposing beside the platform, great clouds of steam still rising from its locomotive. "The missing passenger is one Edmund Thornfield, aged 45, a solicitor of some repute in Lincoln's Inn Fields," Lestrade began, leading us toward a first-class carriage. "He boarded at Norwood Junction at precisely 8:15 this morning. At 8:47, as the train approached Victoria, the conductor, James Hawkins, passed through checking tickets. When he reached this compartment," here he gestured to a door marked with a chalk cross, "Thornfield had vanished, though his hat, coat, and leather portfolio remained precisely where he had placed them." "And the compartment was locked?" Holmes inquired, already examining the door with his lens. "On both sides, Mr. Holmes. The windows, as you can see, cannot be opened more than a few inches, barely enough to pass a hand through. We've interviewed every passenger in the adjacent compartments. None saw or heard anything untoward." Holmes had begun his examination of the compartment with that methodical precision I knew so well. His grey eyes darted from floor to ceiling as he moved with the efficiency of a bloodhound on a scent. He paused at the window, paying particular attention to the brass fittings, then knelt to study something near the leather-upholstered seat. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "Tell me, Inspector, was anything disturbed when you found the compartment?" "Nothing, sir. Everything was just as you see it now." "Including this?" Holmes asked, pointing to a small scuff mark on the leather seat. I believe so, yes," Lestrade replied, with that slight hesitation I had often observed when he found himself on uncertain ground. "Interesting. Very interesting." Holmes straightened up, his expression unreadable. "I should like to speak with the conductor, if you please, and I shall need a complete list of all passengers who boarded at Norwood Junction." As Lestrade hurried off to comply, I ventured, "Have you formed any theory, Holmes?" "Several, my dear Watson, though I must admit the truth may prove stranger than any of them." He picked up Thornfield's abandoned hat, examining the maker's mark inside the brim. "Tell me, what do you make of our missing solicitor's choice of headwear?" I studied the well-made but unremarkable black bowler. It seems perfectly ordinary for a man of his station. "Precisely," Holmes exclaimed, with that familiar gleam in his eye. "Perfectly ordinary, almost too ordinary, wouldn't you say? And observe the slight discoloration on the band, most suggestive." Before I could inquire further, Lestrade returned with a nervous-looking man in a conductor's uniform, who twisted his cap in his hands with the air of one unused to being questioned by gentlemen. "This is James Hawkins, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade announced. "He was the last person to see Mr. Thornfield." "Indeed?" Holmes fixed the conductor with his penetrating gaze. "Tell me, Mr. Hawkins, did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Thornfield's behaviour when you took his ticket?" "Well, sir," Hawkins began, his accent betraying his East End origins. "Now that you mention it, he seemed rather agitated-like. Kept looking at his pocket-watch and muttering something about time running out. Begging your pardon, sir, but it struck me as peculiar for a gentleman of his standing." "And did you observe anyone else paying particular attention to Mr. Thornfield or his compartment?" "No, sir. Though... Hawkins hesitated, his face flushing slightly. "There was a lady in the next compartment. Elegant sort she was, wearing a purple dress with a matching hat. She dropped her handkerchief just as I was passing, and when I picked it up for her I could have sworn I heard something like a muffled cry from Mr. Thornfield's compartment. But when I looked in he was sitting there, calm as you please, reading his newspaper." Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "This lady, was she travelling alone?" "Yes, sir. Got off at the last stop before Victoria, she did. Very refined in her manner, if you take my meaning, sir." "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. You've been most helpful." Holmes turned to Inspector Lestrade. "I should like to examine the track between that last stop and Victoria Station, and I shall need to know everything you can tell me about Mr. Thornfield's personal circumstances, particularly any enemies he might have made in his legal practice." As we left the station, I could not help but notice the slight smile playing about Holmes's lips, the same smile I had seen so often when he had detected something vital that the rest of us had missed entirely. "Holmes," I ventured, "surely you don't think—" "Not now, Watson," he interrupted softly. "The game is afoot, and we must be very careful indeed. For I suspect our phantom passenger is far more substantial than he appears and far more dangerous." The fog had begun to thicken once more as we made our way back to Baker Street, and with it came that inexplicable sense of foreboding I had felt earlier. Somewhere in London, I felt certain, a clock was ticking, and time, as Mr. Thornfield had apparently known, was running out. Chapter 3. The Solicitor's Secret. The offices of Thornfield and Associates occupied the first floor of a dignified Georgian building in Lincoln's Inn Fields, its brass plate bearing the patina of respectability that comes only with decades of established practice. As Holmes and I mounted the well-worn stairs, we encountered a steady stream of clerks and messengers, each according us the precise degree of deference appropriate to gentlemen callers, yet betraying in their manner that peculiar mixture of curiosity and apprehension which suggested the morning's events were already common knowledge. "Mr. Mortimer Whitley?" Holmes inquired of an elderly clerk whose ink-stained fingers and wire-rimmed spectacles bespoke a lifetime of legal documentation. "I am he, sir," the man replied, straightening his waistcoat with fastidious precision. "Though I fear I can be of little assistance in this distressing business. The morning papers—" "Pray do not concern yourself with the papers, Mr. Whitley," Holmes interjected, with that air of quiet authority which so often elicited confidence. "I should be most grateful for a few moments of your time regarding Mr. Thornfield's recent correspondence." "Upon my word, sir, I hardly know if I ought. That is to say, matters of client confidentiality." Whitley's hesitation spoke volumes about the delicacy of his position. "I quite understand," Holmes replied smoothly. "However, as I act on behalf of Mrs. Thornfield in this matter—" The lie was delivered with such consummate ease that I might have believed it myself had I not known better. Its effect on Whitley was immediate. "Oh, well, in that case, pray step into my office, gentlemen. One cannot be too careful in these matters, you understand. The reputation of the firm—" His office proved to be a meticulously ordered sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and alphabetized files, the very air redolent with the peculiar mustiness of legal papers. Whitley settled behind his desk with the air of one accustomed to measuring his words with the same precision as his margins. "I presume," Holmes began, "that you are aware of the threatening letters?" Whitley's start was almost imperceptible, but to Holmes's practised eye it might as well have been a confession. "Aye, that is to say, one does occasionally receive correspondence of an intemperate nature in our profession, Mr. The name is immaterial," Holmes waved away the inquiry. "What interests me is the letter that arrived last Tuesday, written on blue paper with a distinctive watermark. I believe you placed it yourself upon Mr. Thornfield's desk?" I confess I had no idea how Holmes could know such a detail, but Whitley's reaction confirmed its accuracy. "Good heavens, how could you possibly—" "Yes, I did indeed. Most disturbing communication. The gentleman in question was most put out about the Adelaide matter, though I hardly see how—" "The Adelaide matter?" I inquired, but Holmes silenced me with a glance. "These letters," he continued, "were they preserved?" "Mr. Thornfield kept them in his private safe," Whitley replied, tugging nervously at his collar, "though I did observe him burning one yesterday morning, most peculiar, as he was typically most methodical about maintaining records." "And the safe?" "I regret I have not the combination, sir. Only Mr. Thornfield and his wife—" "Quite so. Now, regarding his banking activities of late—" "Oh, that is another matter entirely." Whitley's tone suggested both relief at changing the subject and concern about its implications. "Most irregular. He withdrew a substantial sum 3 days ago, quite unprecedented in my experience. When I ventured to inquire about the annual accounts, he was most sharp with me. 'Time enough for accounting when time itself is accounted for,' he said. Most unlike him, I must say." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Did he specify the amount withdrawn?" £5,000, sir, in bearer bonds and Bank of England notes. I dare say it caused quite a stir at the bank. Mr. Thornfield was most insistent about the denominations." "One final question, Mr. Whitley. Did Mr. Thornfield ever mention a lady in purple?" The clerk's reaction was extraordinary. His already pale complexion became positively ghostly, and his hands trembled as he reached for his handkerchief. I believe I hear one of the junior clerks calling. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen." He fairly fled from his own office, leaving Holmes and me alone among the meticulously ordered files. "Well, Watson," Holmes remarked, carefully pocketing the telegram fragment, "what do you make of that?" "It seems clear that Thornfield was involved in something that frightened him considerably," I ventured. "Though what connection there could be between a legal matter, £5,000, and a mysterious lady in purple—" "Ah, but you perceive the central point." Holmes's eyes sparkled with that peculiar light that suggested he was already several steps ahead in his deductions. "I confess I do not." Consider, my dear fellow, why would a man who is typically most methodical about maintaining records suddenly burn correspondence? Why withdraw such a specific sum in such specific denominations? And why, here he paused significantly, why would the mention of a lady in purple so disturb a man who has spent 40 years handling the most confidential of legal matters? Our next port of call proved to be a handsome villa in St. John's Wood, where we were admitted by a maid whose starched apron and precise curtsy spoke of a well-ordered household. Mrs. Helena Thornfield received us in a morning room whose appointments bespoke both taste and comfort without ostentation. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 35. Her grey silk morning dress perfectly suited to her position, though I observed her hands clasped together with barely suppressed agitation. "I presume, Mr. Holmes," she began without preamble, "that you have come about the Adelaide inheritance?" Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You are aware of the matter, then?" "How could I not be?" She gave a laugh entirely devoid of mirth. "Lady Adelaide Blackwood and her peculiar will have quite consumed my husband's attention these past weeks. The trust was to mature at midnight yesterday, you understand. Edmund was quite convinced there was some irregularity in the document, though he would not speak of it directly. Only that time was of the essence." "And the £5,000? Holmes inquired gently. "Your husband's recent withdrawal?" "He was most particular about the denominations," she replied, her fingers twisting the handkerchief she held. "Small notes only?" "More easily managed," he said, though what he meant to manage with them. She rose abruptly and crossed to an elaborate escritoire. "Perhaps this might illuminate matters, Mr. Holmes. I found it in the grate this morning. Edmund was burning papers late last night. Most unlike him. He has always been so methodical." The document she handed to Holmes proved to be another telegram, its edges charred, but its message still partially legible. "Lady evidence. Must act now. Time. One final question, if I may," Holmes said, carefully pocketing the fragment. "Did you receive a visitor yesterday afternoon? A lady, perhaps, wearing purple?" The effect of this inquiry was extraordinary. Mrs. Thornfield's composure, maintained until now with admirable fortitude, crumbled entirely. "How could you possibly know about her? Unless—" "Yes," she called. "They spoke in Edmund's study for nearly an hour. When she left, he was changed. He wrote a letter immediately afterward. His hands were shaking so that he could hardly hold the pen. 'All will be well by midnight,' he told me. 'Either all will be well or all will be lost.' Those were his exact words, Mr. Holmes." Holmes was about to respond when the sudden tolling of a church bell made us all start. Mrs. Thornfield glanced at the ormolu clock upon the mantelpiece with visible agitation. "Gentlemen, I fear I must ask you to excuse me. I have an appointment which cannot be delayed. Perhaps we might continue this discussion tomorrow." As we took our leave, I observed Holmes's thoughtful expression. "Well, Watson," he remarked once we were back in our hansom, "what do you make of it? The Adelaide inheritance, the £5,000, the mysterious lady in purple. They must all be connected somehow," I ventured. "Indeed. And did you notice anything particular about our visitor's attire as described by Mrs. Thornfield?" "Only that she wore purple, Holmes." "Not just purple, Watson. A most distinctive shade, would you not agree? One that I have observed in only one establishment in all of London." His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light that suggested he was already several steps ahead in his reasoning. "I believe it's time we paid a visit to Regent Street. That particular shade of purple, combined with the quality of the material Mrs. Thornfield described, speaks of only one possible source. Driver, to Madame Beauchamp's millinery establishment, and pray make haste. Chapter 4. Threads in Purple. "Upon my word, Holmes," I exclaimed, as our hansom clattered along Regent Street, "how did you deduce the lady's milliner from nothing more than a glimpse of her hat?" My companion smiled that slight, satisfied smile which I had come to associate with his more brilliant deductions. "Hardly a deduction, my dear fellow. I merely dispatched one of my Baker Street irregulars to make inquiries at every milliner's shop between Norwood and Victoria Station. Young Wiggins has a remarkable eye for detail and a particular talent for extracting information from shop-girls. He reported that only one establishment in London produces that precise shade of purple, a fact which their proprietress guards most jealously." "And you believe this establishment might lead us to our mysterious lady?" "Consider, Watson. A lady of evident refinement purchases a distinctive hat mere days before a most peculiar disappearance. The hat itself is chosen to be noticed, to draw the eye. Why would one wish to be so memorable unless—" "Unless what, Holmes?" "Unless being noticed was precisely the point." Our cab drew to a halt before an elegant shop front, its gilt-edged windows displaying confections of silk and feathers calculated to catch the eye of London's most discriminating ladies. A carefully lettered sign proclaimed Madame Beauchamp's millinery establishment, and beneath it, in slightly smaller letters, "By royal appointment." The latter, with that particular flourish which suggested aspirational rather than actual patronage. The shop bell tinkled with refined discretion as we entered. A young shopgirl, her black dress and starched apron indicating her status as a senior assistant, approached with that peculiar mixture of deference and hauteur perfected by those who served the wealthy. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her accent suggesting an expensive finishing school. "How may we be of assistance?" "Pray inform Madame Beauchamp that Mr. Sherlock Holmes would be most grateful for a moment of her time," Holmes replied, presenting his card with an aristocratic flourish that caused the girl to revise her initial assessment of our social standing. "At once, sir," she murmured, disappearing through a curtained doorway. Moments later, we were ushered into a private salon where Madame Beauchamp herself awaited us. She proved to be a handsome woman of middle years, her silver-streaked hair arranged with artistic precision, her black silk dress indicating both prosperity and proper widowhood. "Mr. Holmes," she said, extending her hand with Parisian grace, "I have of course heard of your reputation, though I cannot imagine what interest London's foremost consulting detective could have in my humble establishment." "Madame," Holmes replied, executing a small bow, "I seek information regarding a lady who purchased one of your distinctive creations yesterday morning, a hat in that particularly striking shade of purple for which you are justly renowned." I observed a slight tightening around Madame's carefully painted lips. "You must understand, Mr. Holmes, that discretion is the very foundation of my business. My clients expect—" "Quite so," Holmes interjected smoothly. "However, when matters of life and death intrude upon matters of fashion, even the most rigorous discretion must occasionally bow to necessity." "Life and death?" Madame's perfectly arched eyebrows rose fractionally. "Surely you exaggerate, sir?" "I fear not. The lady in question was observed this morning on the Norwood Express shortly before a fellow passenger vanished under most suspicious circumstances." Mon Dieu! The exclamation, though theatrical, contained a note of genuine concern. After a moment's hesitation, she continued, "The lady ordered the hat a week ago, paid in cash, which is somewhat unusual for an order of that magnitude. She gave no name, but—" Here she paused significantly. "Yes." "She wore a brooch, most distinctive, the letter A in diamonds. I noticed because it matched the monogram on her handkerchief. Most illuminating, Holmes murmured. And her manner? Did she appear agitated? On the contrary, monsieur, she was most composed, most elegant, though ... Madame Beauchamp's voice dropped to a confidential whisper. There was something in her eyes when she spoke of the Adelaide estate that gave me pause. The Adelaide estate? I ventured, but Holmes silenced me with a glance. One final question, if you please, he said. Did this lady happen to examine any of your mirrors with particular attention? Madame's start was most eloquent. Why, yes. She spent several minutes studying the angle of the triple glass in our fitting room. Most peculiar, she seemed more interested in the mechanism of its movement than her own reflection. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular light I knew so well. Thank you, madam. You have been most helpful, though I should advise you to be cautious should this lady return. She may find your establishment's reputation for discretion especially appealing. As we emerged onto Regent Street, I caught a glimpse of purple disappearing into the fog at the corner. Holmes, surely that's after her, Watson. The game is not yet done. But even as we gave chase through the swirling London murk, I felt rather than saw someone following us through the fog. When I turned to look, there was nothing there but shadows and swirling mist. Yet the sensation of being observed remained unnervingly acute. Chapter 5. Smoke and Mirrors. Our pursuit of the lady in purple through the fog-shrouded Regent Street proved fruitless, though Holmes appeared more amused than disappointed by her escape. "Come, Watson," he said, adjusting his cuffs with that fastidious precision which often preceded his most significant revelations. "I fancy we shall find matters of interest awaiting us at Lincoln's Inn Fields. Our quarry's flight suggests certain papers may be at risk." His prediction proved remarkably prescient. We found Lincoln's Inn Fields in considerable disarray, with several constables maintaining a discreet presence while a cluster of legal clerks huddled beneath umbrellas, their morning constitutional interrupted by this unprecedented breach of professional sanctuary. "Upon my word, sir," Mortimer Whitley exclaimed upon seeing us, his usually impeccable attire showing signs of perturbation. "How could you have known?" "The night porter discovered the break-in not half an hour ago. They've thoroughly ransacked Mr. Thornfield's private office." The chamber in question bore eloquent testimony to a most methodical search. Leather-bound volumes lay scattered about the Turkey carpet, their dignified repose violated by whatever desperate hand had torn them from their shelves. The massive oak desk had been rifled, each drawer standing open like a silent accusation. "Nothing appears to have been taken," Inspector Lestrade informed us, touching his hat-brim to Holmes. "Though they've made a proper mess of the filing system, so Mr. Whitley informs me." "On the contrary," Holmes remarked, his grey eyes sweeping the room, "something of great value has been removed. Observe the dust pattern on this shelf, Inspector. A folder has been extracted with considerable precision. Notice how the adjacent volumes remain undisturbed. Our intruder knew exactly what he sought." "I dare say this confirms your suspicions about the lady in purple, Holmes," I ventured. "It confirms, my dear Watson, that we are dealing with a conspiracy of considerable sophistication. A burglar who ignores a silver inkstand of considerable value, yet takes time to examine legal documents. Most illuminating indeed." He paused by the window, examining the sill with his lens. "Tell me, Mr. Whitley, was there not a file relating to the Adelaide estate kept in this office?" The clerk's start of surprise was most eloquent. "Why, yes, Mr. Holmes, but how could you possibly—" he was interrupted by the arrival of a boy in messenger's livery bearing a note addressed to Mrs. Thornfield in a hand disguised by the expedient of newspaper clippings arranged with painstaking precision. "Madam," Holmes read aloud, having obtained the lady's permission, "your husband's absence may yet be explained to your advantage. Pray attend the Norwood Express platform at Victoria Station tomorrow at precisely 10 o'clock. Come alone, or all shall be revealed. Most interesting. No signature, naturally." "But surely you don't mean for Mrs. Thornfield to comply with this outrageous demand?" I exclaimed. "By no means, Watson, though I fancy we might derive some advantage from appearing to do so." He turned to Lestrade. "I should like to examine the train compartment again, Inspector. I have a particular theory regarding its mechanism that requires verification." The railway carriage, when we reached it, stood isolated in a siding, maintaining its air of inscrutable mystery. Holmes spent nearly an hour examining every inch of its construction, paying particular attention to the door mechanisms. "Ah!" he exclaimed suddenly, his fingers tracing an almost invisible groove in the woodwork. "Just as I suspected. Watson, you recall the Edinburgh disappearance of '82? "I cannot say that I do, Holmes." "No? A most instructive case, though in that instance the mechanism was considerably cruder. Modern engineering has made remarkable strides." He straightened up, brushing dust from his knees. "I should very much like to speak with the railway company's chief engineer, Inspector. A Mr. Harrison, I believe." "Harrison?" Lestrade's ferret-like features showed surprise. "But we've already questioned him thoroughly. Indeed, I have just signed a warrant for the arrest of Frederick Pembroke. The evidence clearly shows—" "My dear Lestrade," Holmes interrupted with that peculiar smile which suggested he knew far more than he was willing to reveal, "I fear you may find Mr. Pembroke's alibi for the crucial period quite unassailable, though I should be most interested to hear his account of certain financial transactions relating to the Adelaide Trust." "I say, Holmes," I interjected, recalling our encounter at the millinery shop, "surely Pembroke's presence there this morning provides him with a perfect alibi for the hours during which certain other events were transpiring, my dear fellow, though I fancy his appearance was not entirely coincidental." He turned to Mrs. Thornfield, who had maintained an admirable composure throughout. "Madam, I must ask you to trust me implicitly in this matter. The note you received suggests our opponent's hand may be forced sooner than he anticipates. Watson, I shall require your assistance tonight. Bring your service revolver." As we departed Victoria Station, I observed a familiar figure watching us from the shadows of the booking office. "Holmes," I whispered, "that man—" Yes, I had noticed our friend in the grey ulster. The third time we've encountered him today. By my count, most gratifying. He confirms several of my theories regarding this curious affair. "Then you know who he is?" "I know what he represents, Watson, though the who, I fancy, may surprise even our friend Lestrade when all is revealed. But come, we have preparations to make if we are to be ready for tomorrow's performance." "Performance, Holmes?" "Indeed, for I suspect our phantom passenger may be preparing for his final journey unless we can persuade him to disembark somewhat earlier than he intends." Chapter 6. The Adelaide Connection. Dawn had scarcely touched the spires of London when Holmes and I found ourselves ensconced in a first-class waiting room at Victoria Station. The previous night's preparations, about which Holmes had maintained an air of sphinx-like inscrutability, had culminated in our current vigil, though its purpose remained as opaque as the morning fog pressing against the windows. "Patience, Watson," Holmes murmured, noting my restiveness. "Our friend from the railway engineering works should arrive momentarily. Observe." A tall figure emerged from the mist, his frock coat and gold-rimmed spectacles lending him that particular air of professional dignity characteristic of the higher branches of mechanical science. At his heels trotted a smaller man whose cloth cap and oil-stained fingers proclaimed his status as a working engineer. "Mr. Harrison," Holmes greeted them, "and Mr. Perkins, if I am not mistaken. Most gratifying of you both to attend at such an early hour." "Upon my word, Mr. Holmes," Harrison replied, employing his silk handkerchief with evident agitation, "your message suggested matters of gravest urgency, though I confess I fail to see what possible connection there could be between Lady Adelaide Blackwood's death and our railway operations." "Perhaps," Holmes suggested, "we might begin with the rather singular modifications made to certain first-class carriages over the past 6 months, modifications authorized, I believe, by a member of your board of directors." Harrison's start was most eloquent. That is to say, such matters are strictly confidential, sir. Company policy, you understand." "Oh, come now, Mr. Harrison." Holmes's tone carried that peculiar note of steel beneath its silk which I had heard so often. "Surely the safety of your passengers must transcend mere policy. Mr. Perkins here, I fancy, might illuminate us regarding certain mechanical innovations." The working engineer tugged nervously at his cap. "Begging your pardon, sir, but their modifications was a most peculiar like. Never seen nothing like 'em in 20 years on the railway. Secret compartments in the panelling they was, and clever springs in the door mechanisms. All done proper and official, mind you, with blueprints from the board and everything." "Signed, no doubt, by Sir George Adelaide?" Holmes inquired softly. The effect of this name upon Harrison was extraordinary. His professional composure crumbled entirely. "How could you possibly— But Sir George has been dead these 5 years." "Precisely, yet his signature appears on documents dated mere months ago. Most singular, wouldn't you agree?" At this moment we were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, accompanied by an elderly gentleman whose threadbare coat and rheumy eyes suggested reduced circumstances. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade began, "I've brought old Jenkins as requested, though I must say—" "Ah, the former station-master at Norwood Junction," Holmes interjected. "Pray tell us, Mr. Jenkins, about the schedule changes you observed last month." "Schedule changes, sir?" Jenkins's voice quavered with age, yet carried that precision born of decades announcing departure times. "Oh, yes, indeed, most irregular. Trains stopping 3 minutes longer than usual at Norwood it was, though not marked in any official timetable. Same day every week, regular as clockwork, and always that same first-class carriage, the one with the purple upholstery." "Purple, you say?" I exclaimed, but Holmes silenced me with a glance. "And did you happen to notice any passengers of particular interest during these unscheduled stops?" "Well, sir, seeing as you ask—" Jenkins glanced nervously at Harrison. "There was a lady, most elegant she was, always wearing purple, and a gentleman who looked uncommon like Sir George Adelaide, though of course it couldn't have been him being dead and all. Made me think I was going senile, it did." "I dare say it did," Holmes remarked dryly, "though your eyes, I fancy, were sharper than you knew. Tell me, Mr. Harrison, was it not Lady Adelaide herself who provided the funds for these mechanical modifications?" "Her solicitor handled all the arrangements," Harrison admitted, mopping his brow. "Mr. Thornfield, as a matter of fact, though what this has to do with—" He was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Mrs. Thornfield, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I have just received the most extraordinary letter from my husband's bank. It seems he had been withdrawing substantial sums over the past year, all authorized by Lady Adelaide's trust." "Indeed?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And these withdrawals coincided perhaps with certain mechanical improvements to the railway?" "The dates match precisely. But there's more." She withdrew a document from her reticule. "I found this among my husband's private papers this morning. It appears Lady Adelaide had discovered something about her late husband's death, something that required both legal expertise and," here she glanced at Harrison, "engineering assistance to prove—" "Ah!" Holmes exclaimed softly. "Now we begin to see the shape of things. Watson, I believe you still have your service revolver." "Excellent. For unless I am much mistaken, our phantom passenger is about to make his final journey. Though perhaps," he added, glancing at his watch, "we might persuade him to consider an alternative destination." "Holmes," I ventured, "surely you don't mean—" "Not here, my dear fellow. The fog is lifting, and with it, I fancy, the veil over this most singular affair. Lestrade, you have your men posted as I requested. Capital. Then let us proceed to platform 3, where I believe we shall find the final piece of this most instructive puzzle." Chapter 7. Shadows on the Platform. The morning fog had begun to dissipate as we assembled on platform 3, though sufficient murk remained to cast ghostly shadows among the forest of iron columns supporting Victoria Station's vast roof. Holmes had positioned us with characteristic precision, Lestrade and his men strategically scattered among the early morning passengers, Harrison and Perkins, the chief mechanical engineer, conferring in studied casualness near the signal box, and Mrs. Thornfield seated decorously upon a station bench, every inch the genteel lady awaiting her train. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, his grey eyes alert beneath the brim of his hat, "how our friend in the ulster maintains his position near the bookstall. The third copy of the Times he has pretended to peruse in the past quarter hour, unless I am much mistaken." I was about to respond when the station clock began to strike 10. As the last chime faded into the general hubbub of the station, a porter appeared, pushing a luggage trolley with a singular item upon it, a brass-bound trunk of evident antiquity, its surface bearing the patina of extensive travel. "Most irregular, sir," the porter was saying to Harrison, touching his cap with proper deference. "Found it in the left luggage office, we did. No ticket, but marked for the 10:15 to Norwood." "Ah," Holmes remarked softly. "Now observe most carefully, Watson, for I fancy we are about to witness a most instructive demonstration of railway engineering." A gentleman had approached the trunk, a distinguished figure in an impeccable frock coat, his silver hair and gold-rimmed pince-nez lending him an air of unimpeachable respectability. "I say," he addressed the porter in cultivated tones, "I believe that trunk belongs to my client. Permit me to examine the documentation." As he bent over the paperwork, I observed his hand move with suspicious swiftness toward the trunk's brass fittings. Holmes's cry of "Now!" shattered the morning calm like a thunderbolt. The transformation that followed was extraordinary. The gentleman's dignified demeanor vanished as he sprang away from the trunk with the agility of a trained acrobat. Lestrade's men converged from all directions, but our quarry displayed remarkable resourcefulness, diving beneath the luggage trolley and emerging on the far side with remarkable agility. "After him, Watson!" Holmes shouted, "but mind the second trunk." Even as we gave chase, I noted a peculiar detail, an identical brass-bound trunk being hurriedly conveyed toward a first-class carriage by two porters I did not recall seeing before. Holmes, however, made no move to pursue it, his attention fixed upon our fleeing quarry. The chase led us through the labyrinth of Victoria Station, past startled passengers, around pillars, and through clouds of engine steam. Our quarry's top hat went flying, his pince-nez abandoned in his flight, yet he maintained a remarkable turn of speed for one of his apparent years. "The signal box, Watson," Holmes called. "He means to use the railway lines." Indeed, our fugitive had begun scaling the iron ladder leading to the elevated signal box, but here Perkins proved his worth. The engineer, anticipating the manoeuvre, had already ascended from the opposite side. As our quarry reached the platform, he found himself confronted by Perkins's solid form. "Begging your pardon, sir," Perkins said with that peculiar mixture of deference and determination characteristic of his class, "but I can't permit tampering with the signals. Railway regulations, you understand." The capture, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Lestrade's men, having finally negotiated the complex geography of the station, arrived to find their quarry effectively cornered. Yet Holmes, I observed, paid little attention to the arrest, his gaze fixed instead upon the first-class carriage where the second trunk had been deposited. "I say, Holmes," I ventured as we regained the platform, "shouldn't we examine that other trunk? Patience, my dear fellow, all in good time. For the moment, I should very much like to hear what our friend Hawkins has observed during his morning duties." The conductor, when summoned, proved most illuminating. "Most peculiar, sir," he reported, tugging nervously at his uniform collar. "That carriage with the purple upholstery, the one Mr. Perkins modified, it's been placed at the rear of the 10:15 service. Against regulations, that is. Should be in the middle of the formation by rights." "Indeed?" Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "And did you happen to notice anything else irregular? The timing of the signals, perhaps?" "Now that you mention it, sir." Hawkins glanced nervously at Harrison. "The signals for the Norwood Junction have been showing odd delays, 3 minutes exactly, every time that particular carriage passes through." "Just as Jenkins observed?" I exclaimed. "Precisely, Watson, though I fancy today's delay may prove somewhat more permanent." Holmes turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, I should like to examine that carriage most carefully before the 10:15 departs. I have reason to believe we may find its mechanism has been prepared for one final disappearing act." Mrs. Thornfield, who had maintained her composure throughout with admirable fortitude, suddenly grasped Holmes's arm. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the lady in purple. I've just seen her boarding the last compartment." "Indeed?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar light I knew so well. "Most illuminating. Tell me, did she appear to be carrying anything of particular note?" "A small valise, rather heavy by the way she handled it." "And—" Mrs. Thornfield hesitated, her gloved hand tightening on her reticule. "She wore the Adelaide diamond brooch. I would recognize it anywhere. It was quite the talk of London society when Sir George first presented it to his wife." "Capital!" Holmes exclaimed, causing us all to start at his enthusiasm. "You've played your part admirably, Mrs. Thornfield. Now, Watson, if you would be so good as to keep your revolver handy, I fancy we are about to witness the final act of this most remarkable drama. Though perhaps," he added, with that slight smile which always preceded his most brilliant deductions, "not quite in the manner our phantom passenger intended." Chapter 8. The Final Station. The 10:15 to Norwood Junction had scarcely cleared Victoria Station when Holmes sprang into action with that peculiar energy which marked his moments of crisis. "Quick, Watson!" he exclaimed, hurrying us toward a waiting hansom. "We must reach Norwood ahead of the train. Lestrade's men have their orders. They will follow with the second cab." As our hansom clattered through London's fog-shrouded streets, I ventured to inquire about his strategy. "My dear fellow," Holmes replied, his grey eyes alight with that singular intensity I knew so well, "consider. What manner of man would go to such elaborate lengths to impersonate his own deceased brother?" Before I could respond, we had arrived at Norwood Junction. Holmes led us not to the platform, but to a small door marked private, where we found Inspector Lestrade and his men already assembled. "Absolute silence now, Watson," Holmes whispered. "Lives may depend upon perfect timing." The passage beyond the door revealed a warren of maintenance tunnels beneath the station. Holmes positioned us behind a massive pillar just as the rumble of approaching wheels resonated through the underground chamber. Above us, the 10:15 from Victoria rolled to a stop. What followed occurred with the precision of a theatrical performance. Through gaps in the stonework, I observed the lady in purple alight from her compartment, moving with studied grace toward the rear of the train. At that precise moment, a figure emerged from the shadows, a distinguished gentleman whose bearing spoke of generations of privilege. "Everything is prepared?" the lady inquired, her gloved fingers toying with a distinctive diamond brooch. "My dear accomplice," the gentleman replied with exquisite courtesy, "I rather think we have performed this charade long enough. Poor Mr. Thornfield very nearly upset our plans with his inconvenient investigations." "He was becoming rather troublesome," she agreed with a cold laugh. "Though I must say, his unfortunate accident in our mechanical compartment was really quite ingenious, just as effective as your disposal of your dear brother 5 years ago." "I would not speak so freely of Sir George's demise," he cautioned, though his tone carried a note of pride. "The proper application of mechanics, combined with a well-compensated physician's silence, has served us admirably, though I dare say tonight's employment of our special carriage will be the last." "Quite right, Mr. James Adelaide," Holmes's voice rang out as he stepped from concealment, "though perhaps not in the manner you intended." The transformation in both parties was extraordinary. James Adelaide's patrician demeanour crumbled into something altogether more feral, while the lady's triumphant poise dissolved into naked fear. "Impossible," James snarled, his cultured accent slipping. "You cannot prove—" "Your impersonation of Sir George, the mechanical compartment designed for your appearances and disappearances, the murder of your own brother, followed by that of Mr. Thornfield when he discovered the truth. I fancy the evidence speaks rather eloquently." Holmes's voice carried that peculiar note of steel beneath its silk. "The railway board may have been deceived by Sir George's signatures appearing after his death, but the modifications to this carriage tell their own tale." "As does this, I fancy," remarked Lestrade, emerging with his men from various concealed positions. The click of handcuffs echoed through the tunnel as the constables secured both prisoners. "Upon my word, Mr. Holmes, a proper pair of villains, though I dare say the hangman at Newgate will soon have the final word." Mrs. Thornfield, who had maintained a dignified silence throughout, spoke at last. "Then my husband died trying to expose their scheme?" "He died, madam, in the service of justice," Holmes replied with grave courtesy, "though I fancy his sacrifice will ensure these two pay the fullest penalty of the law." As we watched Lestrade and his men lead both James Adelaide and the lady in purple away to their final reckoning, I could not help but reflect on the grim symmetry of the affair. Later, over brandy in Baker Street, I remarked as much to Holmes. "Indeed, Watson," he replied, filling his pipe with his evening tobacco. "A fortune, a murder, and a mechanical marvel, all serving to obscure one simple truth, that justice, like a railway line, inevitably reaches its terminal. The Adelaide fortune will now pass to its rightful heirs, and 2 more criminals have reached their final station. Their last journey will be somewhat shorter than they planned, Holmes. Upon my word, my dear fellow," he remarked, with that slight smile I knew so well, "I rather think it will." It was not until several days after the dramatic events at Norwood Junction that I found opportunity to inquire more deeply into the particulars of the case. Holmes and I sat before a cheerful fire in our Baker Street quarters, he occupied with his after-dinner pipe, while I made notes for what I hoped might become a record of this most singular affair. "I confess, Holmes," I ventured at length, "several aspects of the business remain rather obscure to me. The mechanical contrivance, for instance, how exactly did it operate?" Holmes rose and fetched a roll of technical drawings from his desk. "Observe, Watson," he said, spreading them before me. "The ingenuity lies in its very simplicity. The compartment floor beneath the seat could be swiftly lowered into a hollow space between the tracks, created during those supposedly routine maintenance works. The seat itself was mounted on perfectly balanced springs, allowing it to return to position without betraying the absence of its occupant. But surely such a device would require exceptional timing. Precisely why the train made those peculiar 3-minute stops at specific points. Mr. Perkins, the railway's chief mechanical engineer, was most illuminating on this point. The modifications appeared legitimate, bearing Sir George Adelaide's signature, though of course the signatures were supplied by his brother James after Sir George's murder. And poor Thornfield! How did he discover the truth? Through careful examination of the Adelaide estate's accounts, he noted discrepancies in the railway company's invoices, payments for maintenance work that seemed excessive. His investigation led him to those modified carriages and ultimately to his death when he grew too close to the truth. The £5,000 withdrawn from his bank was intended as blackmail payment before our villains decided on a more permanent solution. But the lady in purple, Holmes? Why such an elaborate disguise? Ah, his eyes gleamed. That particular shade, Watson, that was the masterstroke of misdirection. While witnesses focused on the distinctive colour, they paid far less attention to other aspects of her appearance. She was, in fact, James Adelaide's accomplice, helping him maintain the illusion of his brother's occasional appearances. The diamond A brooch was a rather theatrical touch, I must say, flaunting the very evidence of their deception. Good heavens, Holmes! Then the mechanical compartment served both for Thornfield's murder and James Adelaide's impersonation of his brother. Precisely so. James would emerge at crucial moments to sign documents or make brief appearances, maintaining the illusion that Sir George was still alive and in control of the estate. The lady in purple provided the necessary diversions and alibis, most ingenious, though ultimately fallible. A rather specialized addition to the science of detection, Holmes. My dear fellow, he replied, sending a perfect smoke ring toward the ceiling. In an age of mechanical marvels, we must be prepared to combat mechanical crimes. Though I fancy few criminals will attempt quite so theatrical a performance in future, particularly given that both James Adelaide and his accomplice now await the hangman at Newgate. The fire had burned low, and outside our windows a thick London fog had begun to settle over Baker Street. Somewhere in the distance we could hear the muted whistle of a train, a commonplace sound that now, perhaps, carried just a touch more mystery than it had before. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.